The stovetop still gave off heat as my daughter-in-law smirked, whispering that my cooking tasted like a retirement home. Still holding the carving knife, I served her plate first. Roast duck, family glaze, no reaction. As her guests raised their phones, the chef laid down a recipe card, with her name across the top. While the cameras rolled, he read it, line for line, from my 2011 archive. The same woman who mocked my food had just claimed my legacy on paper. That's when I realized. She didn't steal my recipe. She walked into my kitchen holding the receipt. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The scent of rosemary and browned butter hung in the air like a memory Lena had no intention of letting go. Outside, twilight burned low across the Napa sky, a deep amber melting into violet. Inside her estate kitchen, the heat wasn't just from the ovens. Lena adjusted the hand-stitched linen napkins one last time, then wiped her palms on the apron tied crisp around her waist. The dining room, long walnut table, candlelit and quiet, waited like a stage. Tonight wasn't about flair or fusion. It was roast chicken, wild mushroom stuffing, green beans sautéed the way her mother did when budgets were thin and flavors were sacred. Maya popped her head in from the hallway. "Guests are arriving. Ethan's parking." Lena nodded, her hands already checking the warmth of the plates. "Pour the Malbec. Start with the cheese tartlets." The front door opened with laughter just a bit too loud for the room. Kristen. She swept into the foyer in a floor-length silk dress like she'd wandered in from the wrong event entirely. A gold cocktail glass dangled lazily from her fingers. Her heels tapped against the hardwood like applause meant for herself. "I thought this was casual," Maya whispered. "It was," Lena said softly, slicing into a cranberry-glazed tenderloin. She didn't look up. Dinner moved smoothly, for a while. Crystal clinked, wine flowed, and Lena watched plates fill and empty with practiced ease. Kristen picked at her food, her manicured nails clicking against the porcelain, with the rhythm of someone who wanted to be anywhere else. Then it happened. Midway through the second course, as the sweet potato gratin passed around, Kristen leaned toward Lena's neighbor, a tech investor named Devin. Her voice, perfectly pitched for not-so-private shade, cut through the background hum. "This tastes like something from a retirement home." The words were coated in a sweet venom, followed by a smirk that held too long. The room froze, mid-bite, mid-pour, mid-laugh. Devin's smile collapsed. Ethan stared hard into his wine like it had answers. Someone coughed. Maya stopped in the kitchen doorway, still holding a ramekin. Lena didn't flinch. She finished pouring panjas over the carved turkey and set the gravy boat gently beside it. The candles flickered, unbothered. Years in catering had taught her how to hear things without reacting, but Maya saw it. The tiniest pause in Lena's hand, the half blink, the way her knuckles whitened just briefly on the silver tongs. Kristen leaned back in her chair, the picture of oblivious grace, and refreshed her lip gloss at the table. Her phone buzzed. A few taps later, her screen lit up. Maya glanced down as she passed behind her, catching a glimpse of the caption Kristen posted under a filtered shot of the meal. "When you pretend to enjoy rustic peasant food." The caption was as careless as it was cruel. Lena returned from the kitchen with a bowl of roasted carrots, glazed with orange zest and maple. She placed them on the table without a word, her expression smooth, controlled. Kristen didn't even glance up. The silence was the kind that only good manners and social obligation could maintain. Gwen hadn't arrived yet. She was scheduled for dessert, but her absence left a vacuum no one else could fill. Ethan tried to restart the conversation with something about the wine's tannins. No one cared. Lena finally sat down. She lifted her fork, took one bite of her own food, then placed it back down with exact precision. Maya cleared the empty appetizer plates, jaw set tight. As she leaned in to grab Kristen's untouched dish, their eyes met. "Don't overthink it," Kristen said under her breath. "Too low for anyone else." "She's used to being the center of attention." Maya didn't answer. She turned, plate stacked high, and disappeared into the kitchen. Lena sipped her water. The room shifted, just slightly, as if everyone had felt the drop in temperature. She smoothed her napkin over her lap and smiled at Devon. "Would you like more stuffing?" He nodded, awkward and grateful. "It's incredible, Lena. Really." Kristen rolled her eyes, but this time no one was watching her. Except Lena. And in that moment, Lena finally looked up, just long enough to lock eyes with her daughter-in-law. She smiled. Not wide. Not warm. But steady. A smile with teeth behind it. Outside, the vineyard hummed under the evening stars. Inside, something sharper was coming to boil. Morning sun sliced through the sheer linen curtains in Lena's study, catching the dust motes mid-drift like flecks of flour. She sat at her desk, the wood worn smooth from decades of recipes scrawled in shorthand and red wine rings left by late-night planning. The air smelled faintly of dried thyme and something deeper. Resolve. The envelope sat to her left, unopened but not forgotten. She reached for the old landline, not her cell. Some conversations needed weight. 2 rings. Then a smooth, familiar voice answered. "You're calling early. That either means frost on the vines or someone insulted your gravy." "Worse," Lena said, resting back in her chair. "Someone confused it for cafeteria food." A pause, then a low chuckle. "I assume Kristen's still alive?" "Barely. I let the roast rest longer than I let her nonsense sit." Antonio Reyes didn't need more detail. Theirs was a friendship seasoned in steam and pressure, built in restaurant kitchens and late-night cleanup crews, where respect was earned by how you held a knife and how you treated the dishwashers. "You still teaching at Ridgefield Culinary?" she asked, voice casual. "Every other Friday. Why?" "I need a kitchen. Yours. One night. Something intimate. Clean lines. Full visibility." There was a short silence, then the creak of his stool. "You want the event suite?" "I want the chef's table," she said, "and I want mirrors, cameras, audience close enough to smell the garlic sweat." Antonio gave a low whistle. "Lena Monroe's planning a show." "I'm planning a lesson." The line clicked softly as someone picked up the extension in the hallway. "Gwen." "Make it loud," she said, without greeting. "Make it so damn loud she won't hear herself chew." Lena smiled without turning. Of course Gwen had been listening. The woman had the ears of a hawk and the discretion of a drunk poet. "She laughed at my food," Lena said quietly. "She laughed at your legacy," Gwen corrected, stepping into the room. Her silver hair was tucked into a blue bandana, the same kind she wore when carving pumpkins or skinning whole rabbits. "So serve her humility, braised, plated, and flaming at the edges." Antonio's voice crackled back on. "Done. I'll send you the date options and access codes. Use whatever staff you need." "Thank you," Lena said, voice even. "One question," he added. "Is she cooking?" "She'll think she is." When she hung up, Lena moved with quiet purpose. She opened the top drawer of her antique secretary cabinet, pulled out a slim notebook, and flipped through tabs marked with tape. Soups, winter roasts, showstoppers, and finally, inheritables. She paused on a page titled Redemption Meal. Maya tapped lightly on the doorframe. "I saw Kristen's new post," she said, holding her phone. The screen showed a filtered image of Lena's dining room, gold-lit and timeless, with the caption, "Dinner takeover, incoming time to upgrade the family menu." Lena took the phone, studied it. "Perfect," she said. "Let her keep thinking that." Maya looked at her. You want help with the order list? Not yet. First, the uniform. From a shelf in the corner, Lena pulled out a garment bag and unzipped it. Inside hung a crisp, tailored chef's jacket, white, pristine, stitched with the name Kristen in small, elegant black embroidery. Maya blinked. You had it made already? Lena's lips curled faintly. I've been planning to teach her something. I just hadn't decided what. She handed Maya the bag. Steam it, box it in tissue, and send it to her house with a note. What should it say? Just 2 words, Lena said, already scribbling on a note card. Be ready. The following morning, Lena walked through the vineyard kitchen with a cup of chicory coffee, the hum of bees outside blending with the soft whir of the ceiling fan. Maya was setting up prep trays when the first ping from Lena's phone cut through the calm. It was a group text, Kristen's name flashing in bold. Planning the menu for my exclusive vineyard dinner, can't wait to share my signature sea bass with citrus foam. Old world elegance meets modern plating. Ja, chef life. Ja, wine country magic. Lena stared at it for a long beat, then let out a breath that sounded more like a quiet laugh than amusement. Maya caught the expression. She's doubling down, huh? She's performing, Lena said, and every performance needs an audience. She set her mug down, walked to the office alcove, and opened an old recipe binder, its corners yellowed, pages softened from years of kitchen steam. She flipped past crab bisque, corn pudding, truffle reductions, until her fingers landed on a printout from 2011. There it was. Pan-seared sea bass with citrus foam and fennel pear relish. A forgotten food blog she used to follow. The same ingredients. The same description. Even the same drizzle pattern in the attached photograph. Would you look at that? Lena murmured, tilting the page toward the light. She didn't even bother to switch the garnish. Should I tell Antonio? Maya asked. Lena gave a small nod. Send him a copy. He'll know what to do. At the Ridgefield Culinary Event office later that afternoon, Antonio's inbox lit up with 2 emails. The first was from Maya. Subject line, for your eyes. The second arrived 15 minutes later, from Kristen Monroe herself. Subject, menu submission for the Vineyard Dinner event. Antonio opened it, and there it was. A polished PDF with gold borders, her name across the top like a luxury label. Inside, identical measurements, identical phrasing. He exhaled through his nose, leaned back in his chair, and chuckled quietly. Ah, Lena. You've baited a fine hook. Gwen appeared in the doorway behind him, carrying a mug of black coffee and the kind of expression that usually preceded trouble. You're grinning like a fox. Who's bleeding? Antonio turned the monitor toward her. Her eyes scanned both recipes, the printout from Maya and Kristen's PDF, side by side. She didn't even change the font, Gwen said. Deadpan. Lord help her, it's like forging a painting and leaving the artist's signature on it. Antonio smiled. Lena's going to enjoy this. Enjoy it? Gwen snorted. She's going to slow roast it. That evening, the vineyard glowed gold under the late sun. Ethan sat on the patio scrolling through his phone, frowning slightly. Kristen, maybe tone down the posts. You've tagged half of Napa. It looks like you're hosting the Oscars. Kristen adjusted her sunglasses and laughed. Oh, please. People love a little glamour. And this dinner? It's my rebrand. I've got 2 influencers flying in. Mom's supposed to host this, not you. She'll thank me later, Kristen said breezily, taking a sip of her Sauvignon Blanc. I'm giving her estate visibility. My followers adore the whole rustic chic vibe. Ethan rubbed his temples. Just don't start another fight, okay? Relax, she said. This time I've hired a private chef. We'll be flawless. Inside the kitchen, unseen by either of them, Lena was on the phone, her tone light but deliberate. Yes, she said. It's the same vendor she used for that wine pairing brunch last spring. A pause. Then a low hum of confirmation. Good, she said. Keep the booking exactly as it is. Just reroute the location and send the confirmation to my address. I'll handle the rest. She hung up, the faintest trace of satisfaction curving her lips. Maya entered quietly, drying her hands on a towel. You really think she'll go through with it? Oh, she'll go through with it, Lena said, folding the food blog printout neatly and sliding it into a file marked Receipts. And when she does, every bite will tell the truth she's been trying to fake. Maya hesitated. You sound almost calm. Lena's eyes gleamed. Anger burns too fast. I prefer a slow simmer. The email came just after breakfast, short and smug. Subject, dinner update. Kristen Monroe. Hi, Lena, just a heads up. Thinking we move the dinner to the guest house? It's got better light for filming, and I've already told the photographer. Hope that's okay. Lena read it once, then again, letting her eyes skim over the word thinking like it had weight it didn't deserve. She didn't reply. Instead, she slid her phone across the marble counter and turned back to the handwritten seating plan in front of her. 8 names, 3 decades of relationships, and 1 long overdue correction. Later that afternoon, Maya found her in the estate dining room, arms crossed, staring at the long mahogany table like it was a chessboard, and she was 6 moves ahead. She wants to move it, Lena said, not turning. Wants the guest house. Maya nodded. Should we say no? We say yes, Lena said. And then we set our own table? In here. Maya tilted her head. You want 2 dinners? No, Lena said, finally turning. I want 1 performance, but 2 stages. By midweek, the main estate kitchen had transformed into something between a film set and a surgical theater. The windows had been wiped spotless. A canopy of stainless steel mirrors had been installed above the prep station, angled just right to catch every move of a knife, every flick of a whisk. Antonio arrived wearing a crisp white chef's coat and that unreadable calm he carried like a second skin. We'll do 3 fixed cameras, he said to Maya, gesturing toward the rafters, and 1 on the plating station. Maya scribbled notes, already organizing equipment carts. And the floor plan? Antonio walked to the chalkboard Lena kept for holiday menus and drew a square around the island. We put the guests here. 1 row, shoulder to shoulder. No one can hide behind a centerpiece. Lena walked in carrying a box of antique silver spoons. No floral arrangements, she said. No distractions. Just her, the stove, and the truth. Gwen arrived that afternoon, heels clicking through the hall like warning shots. She dropped her overnight bag by the pantry and pulled out a wrap of cloth from inside her tote. Inside, her knives. She unfolded them slowly, blade by blade, a soft whisper of steel against flannel. She won't be ready, Gwen muttered, testing the balance on a boning knife. Not with those fake chef coats and sponsored aprons. She won't know what hit her, Maya said, pulling cords through the floor sockets. She won't even know she's already been hit, Lena added. Meanwhile, across the gravel courtyard at the guest house, Kristen was giving a tour to a rented lighting tech. I want it bright, she said, but soft bright. Like, expensive bright? Candlelight, but make it Instagram. She waved her hand toward the French doors. And can you get a shot of me prepping at the stove, but with, like, the vineyard in the background? So it feels, what's the word? Elevated. She was in athleisure this time, but her makeup was heavy, contoured like she was auditioning for a cooking segment she'd already imagined herself booked for. Her phone buzzed again. She grinned and typed quickly. About to teach this old vineyard a few new tricks, stay tuned. That night, Ethan found Lena in the main kitchen, testing sauce reduction over low heat. He looked tired, creased at the edges in a way that had nothing to do with work. I don't want to pick sides, he said. You don't have to, Lena replied. He rubbed the back of his neck. I didn't think it would get this far. Lena stirred the pot slowly, never looking up. Neither did I. But then again, I thought she married you for love. Turns out it was for the photo ops. Ethan exhaled, shame flickering behind his eyes. Just don't make it a war. Lena finally met his gaze, steady and unblinking. It's not a war, she said. It's dinner. He didn't know how to argue with that. So he didn't. He walked out quietly. The spoon kept stirring, the sauce kept reducing. And somewhere across the courtyard, Kristen was posing with a ring light, still thinking the show was hers. The guests arrived just before sunset, their shoes clicking along the gravel path that wound from the vineyard gate to the Monroe Estate's main house. The air smelled of lavender and distant wood smoke. Camera lenses dangled from shoulders. Laughter rose in polite clusters. Everyone was dressed for something exclusive, something performative. Kristen greeted them near the guest house, wearing a tailored jumpsuit and oversized sunglasses, though the sun had already dipped behind the hills. Her hair was curled, her gloss was fresh, and her phone never left her hand. Come on in, she chirped. Dinner's just getting started. She turned toward the kitchen entrance, only to freeze. One of the estate staff gently redirected the guests across the courtyard. Oh, there's been a slight shift, he said, smile tight but rehearsed. We're actually holding tonight's dinner in the main house. Kristen blinked. What? The kitchen has been staged for an immersive experience, he continued. Chef Antonio's request. Before she could argue, the guests were already being ushered toward the estate dining room, laughing and murmuring about the chef's table concept. Kristen scrambled to catch up, her heels sinking slightly into the gravel. Inside, the dining room had transformed. The long table was gone. In its place stood a gleaming demonstration island, flanked by 12 high-backed stools arranged in a semicircle. Above the workspace, stainless steel mirrors reflected every polished surface. The lights had been softened to a cinematic hue. Warm, golden, precise. The room buzzed with quiet anticipation. Antonio emerged from the prep area in full whites, a slim folder tucked under one arm. Welcome, he said, his voice calm and resonant. Tonight's dinner is inspired by a very familiar palette. Kristen moved to protest, but her voice caught in her throat as Antonio opened the folder and removed a single laminated page, Kristen's own PDF recipe. Her name was printed boldly across the top. Sea base with citrus foam, he said, holding the sheet up. A modern classic. Sourced from a recipe submitted by our own guest of honor. Lena sat in the back row, still as a stone, her hands folded loosely in her lap. Gwen leaned beside her, peeling the foil from a hard candy. Kristen stood frozen near the entryway, eyes flicking from the guests to the overhead mirrors, back to Antonio. Wait, this isn't the menu I prepped with. But no one was listening. The room was already tilting toward the show. Antonio placed the recipe on the counter and looked out at the guests. What I love about this dish, he said, is how well it blends borrowed elegance with bold reinterpretation. It's a dish with history. There was a pause, subtle and surgical. Kristen stepped forward, her face a porcelain mask. Actually, I was going to start with a pear salad, just to open the palate. Antonio offered a gentle smile. Oh, we're opening your palate, right now. A few polite chuckles rose from the guests. One of the cameras panned to Kristen. In the silence, Gwen leaned toward Maya and said in a voice that traveled, I hope she knows how to julienne. Would be a shame if she mangled the fennel. A wave of laughter followed, restrained, but real. Kristen's hands twitched at her sides. Antonio turned to her. Would you mind joining me at the station? What? Come, he said, stepping aside. It's your dish. Let's prepare it together. That's what the chef's table is for. Transparency. Kristen looked around, disoriented, suddenly aware of how close the guests were. How little there was to hide behind. Her eyes flicked to Ethan. He was seated in the back, jaw tight, saying nothing. Lena hadn't moved. A crew member handed Kristen a fresh apron, pressed white cotton, still creased from the fold. She took it with mechanical hands. Antonio gestured toward the workstation. "The fish is yours," he said. "Show us how it's done." Kristen stood at the stainless steel island, her shoulders stiff under the too crisp weight of the apron. Under the mirrored canopy, every twitch of her fingers echoed back down at her. The overhead lighting turned her foundation slightly gray, the shine on her forehead unforgiving. A single sea bass fillet lay on a cutting board in front of her, its skin glistening like it knew what was coming. Antonio stepped back, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Kristen inhaled, exhaled, and reached for a small bowl of aromatics. "Okay, first, garlic," she mumbled, fingers closing around the nearest bulb. "No," Gwen said evenly from her stool. "Those are shallots." Kristen paused, then blinked down at the pile. "Oh, right." A beat passed. She didn't correct it. She just kept going, slicing the shallots with slow, clumsy strokes, the blade thick and hesitant. They came out uneven, some barely scored, others nearly minced. Antonio didn't stop her. Neither did Maya, though her face flickered briefly behind the camera lens. A few guests exchanged glances, subtle but unmistakable. Kristen moved on. "Next is fennel." She held up a pale bulb, then glanced toward the mirror above, checking her own posture before setting it down. She cut it lengthwise instead of across. Too thick. She didn't trim the core. "You might want to remove the heart," Gwen said sweetly, sipping from a stemless glass of sparkling water. "It can be bitter. Like jealousy." A ripple of laughter. Kristen flushed, her smile tight. "Right, of course. I was just testing the knife." Antonio stepped forward then, slow and deliberate, lifting one of her uneven slices and holding it up to the overhead cam. "Consistency is the soul of presentation," he said, voice gentle but firm. "In knife work and in identity." He laid it back down, then motioned for her to continue. Kristen swallowed hard and moved to the saucepan. Citrus foam. The step that looked easiest in her Instagram reel. But here, with real heat, real time, and real eyes, her hands trembled. She added zest. Too much. Then cream. Too fast. Then, in a panic, she turned the flame up. A sizzle burst from the saucepan, too sharp, too high, and smoke bloomed. She grabbed a whisk, stirring frantically, trying to salvage what had already scorched. The citrus curdled against the cream. A sour edge filled the air. Antonio stepped in. He didn't speak. He just lowered the heat, added a splash of stock from a small side pot, and began whisking in a practiced rhythm. Smooth, effortless, clean. The sauce calmed. Kristen stepped back, her face frozen. Gwen leaned over to Lena, whispering, "You remember that one time in Atlanta, when the Sioux tried to flambe the soup?" Lena's mouth curled into a faint smile. She hadn't moved from her seat, her hands still folded, her gaze never leaving the station. Kristen's breathing was shallow now. Her eyes darted toward Ethan again, but he was leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, watching silently. Antonio placed the ladle aside and looked at her. "Go ahead," he said. "You'll need to plate." Kristen's hands hovered over the tray of garnishes, then reached for the microgreens. "They go last," Gwen called, not unkindly. "Otherwise they wilt." Kristen dropped them like they burned. Maya stepped in, handing her a warm plate. It was like handing someone the last piece of evidence. Kristen plated with unsure hands, fish slightly off-center, foam clinging unevenly to the edge, fennel piled like an afterthought. She turned to Antonio. He nodded once. "Thank you." Then he picked up the next fillet, calmly, quietly, like a man resetting the truth. The dining room had settled into a strange, tense quiet, one part sympathy, one part voyeurism. Every guest knew they'd seen something raw, not dramatic, not explosive, just real. And Kristen was still standing there, motionless behind the prep station, as Antonio slid the second plate forward with practiced ease. This one was perfect. The foam clung like silk to the edge of the fish. The fennel was shaved into translucent ribbons. Microgreens floated above the heat without wilting. Antonio faced the room, eyes steady. "Our opening course," he said, voice smooth as ever, "is sea bass with citrus foam and fennel pear relish, an adaptation of a 2011 Bon Appetit feature. Rediscovered perhaps, but not forgotten." He turned toward Kristen but said nothing else. A few guests clapped politely. Gwen stifled a snort into her napkin. Kristen blinked, her jaw tensed as if she might force a smile. But no words came. Her eyes darted from Antonio to the mirrors overhead, then to the camcorder's red blinking light. She spun toward the back of the room, toward Ethan, waiting for something. Anything. He looked away. And just like that, she slipped out from behind the island and walked past the table. No eye contact. No thank you. Just the clicking of her heels against polished stone as she left the room, the apron still tied awkwardly at her waist like a stage costume she never finished earning. Maya stepped quietly from the shadows and cleared the prep station without a word. Lena watched the whole thing from the far stool. Still. Wordless. Calm. Antonio wiped down the counter with a linen towel and turned to Maya. "Next course." She nodded and lifted a covered tray from the warming drawer. The scent hit first. Rich. Familiar. Brown butter and sweet onions. Antonio carefully plated the new dish, handmade spoon bread with charred corn and caramelized shallots, finished with a thyme honey glaze. He added a whisper of crème fraîche and cracked pepper. He looked out at the table. This next course comes from Lena Monroe's archive, her mother's Sunday recipe, reinterpreted with care. Nothing borrowed, nothing stolen, just memory. Maya served plate by plate, quiet and efficient. Lena finally rose. Not dramatic. Just right. She moved slowly, each step measured, and took Kristen's empty seat at the head of the table. The chair felt firm beneath her, grounded. She lifted her fork with poise, took a bite, and set it down. Then, for the first time all evening, she spoke. "Flavor doesn't come from reinvention," she said, her voice smooth but rooted. "It comes from knowing where you started." Glasses were lifted in silence. Then Gwen raised hers just a little higher. "To the originals." The room exhaled, like a truth had finally been acknowledged aloud. Lena lifted her glass and nodded. She didn't need to say anything else. At that moment, a server gently swung the dining room door shut behind them. Outside, footsteps crunched on gravel. Kristen's, moving fast. A gust of wind lifted the corner of a linen curtain near the door, before falling still again. The hum in the room shifted. No longer strained, no longer performative. What remained now was something grounded, cleaner, warmer, real. Antonio stood behind the island, sleeves rolled, posture relaxed in a way it hadn't been all evening. The cameras were still recording, but their presence now felt peripheral, an archive, not a spectacle. He lifted the next course from the sous vide bath and began plating with a calm rhythm, hands steady, movements pared down to precision and care. He didn't narrate, he didn't explain, not at first. Maya stepped forward instead. "Tonight's second course," she said, voice clear and sure, "is red wine braised short rib over stone ground grits with heirloom carrot puree. Inspired by the meal Lena cooked the night she told her father she wasn't going to finish nursing school. She was going to feed people instead. Lena said nothing, but the corner of her mouth twitched upward. A quiet acknowledgement. A memory pressed into flavor. Plates were served, spoons dipped, glasses clinked again. Gwen gave a small hum after her first bite. Salted just like someone knew she had something to prove. Guests smiled, more freely now. Antonio returned to the station and began prepping the third course: chilled cucumber and tarragon soup, poured tableside into porcelain bowls already lined with a sliver of crab and pickled shallot. Maya continued, now moving beside the guests as she spoke. This one came from a summer she spent as the only woman in a kitchen full of egos. They'd dump prep on her, try to make her crack. So she perfected this dish at home. Light, exacting, impossible to fake. She brought it in one day and left it in the staff fridge with no note. The next day, the chef asked who made it. No one answered. But Lena knew. Lena didn't blink. Her hands rested on the edge of the table like they belonged there. The soup disappeared fast. Course 4 arrived. Cast-iron cornbread croutons nestled in a late-fall salad of chicory, honey-crisp apple, and smoked pecans. Antonio drizzled a buttermilk vinaigrette over each plate with the casual grace of someone who understood reverence. She made this after her mother passed, Maya said. It was the first time she cooked with grief in the room. The only sweetness came from the apples. The bitterness stayed. The table went quiet again, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was sacred. Outside, the wind had picked up. Branches scratched softly against the stone walls. At the far end of the kitchen, where the pantry door stood ajar, something shifted. A shadow, maybe. Kristen. She stood half-hidden behind the doorframe, fingers curled around the edge, mascara slightly smudged, lips parted just enough to reveal the truth. She didn't understand how she'd lost the room. But she had. Maya turned and caught a glimpse of her but said nothing. Just went back to the table and poured another round of wine. Course 5. Slow roasted duck with blackberry jess and cornbread stuffing. She cooked this after Ethan was born, Maya said. When Lena realized she couldn't be both everywhere and everything, so she started doing only what mattered. Ethan's eyes dropped to his plate. He didn't look up. When the final course arrived, apple cider cake with cinnamon glaze and whipped creme fraiche, Antonio stepped back from the island and nodded toward Lena. She rose again, slow and deliberate, and took her glass in hand. This menu, she said, isn't innovation. It's inheritance. It's what comes through you when you stop trying to impress and start trying to remember. She lifted her glass higher. To those who know where their flavor comes from. Around the table, guests raised theirs. Gwen clinked Lena's with a proud smirk. Maya's hand didn't shake when she held hers up. And in the shadows behind the pantry door, Kristen lowered her gaze, not because she didn't want to be seen, but because she finally was. It started with a clip, 13 seconds long. A close-up of Kristen, brow furrowed, turning up the flame under the saucepan too fast, too high, followed by a puff of steam and Gwen's voice, dry and amused. I hope she knows how to julienne? Then another cut. Antonio calmly lifting Kristen's printed recipe, the camera lingering on her name as he said, rediscovered perhaps, but not forgotten. Someone had edited it cleanly, elegantly, with music. Within 6 hours, the video was stitched into duets on TikTok. Within 12, it was reposted on a trending culinary gossip account. By the next morning, it had cracked Instagram's Explore page under the hashtag Haas Chef Table Revenge. By noon, the title that stuck wasn't hers. Vineyard mother-in-law silences fraud with recipe card. Kristen saw it before Ethan did. She woke to dozens of text messages, most unreadable through the screen glare and rising panic. The original post had already hit over 2 million views. She sat on the edge of their guesthouse bed, legs pulled up under her, phone in hand, her thumbnail raw from biting. One comment after another rolled in. Imagine stealing a recipe and still burning the sauce. Lena is the moment. Chef Kristen. More like Chef Crisis. She hit refresh. The numbers kept climbing. She clicked over to her brand account, Kitchen Kristen, and watched the follower count spiral backward. Tens, then hundreds, then thousands gone. Ethan walked in mid-scroll. He saw the way she was curled, the slump in her shoulders, the glow of failure radiating from the screen. "Don't," she said before he could speak. "I know." He didn't answer. She held the phone up toward him anyway. "You see what your mother did?" He blinked. What she did? She orchestrated this whole thing. The dinner, the cameras, the fake chef's table. She made me look like some amateur on national TV. "It wasn't national," he said softly. "It was a private dinner. You just brought the world into it." Kristen stared at him like she didn't recognize him. "You're taking her side?" He didn't reply. She looked back at her phone, scrolled, refreshed. Saw a new comment thread forming. Antonio.Reyes.official. Under a reposted clip of him adjusting Kristen's broken sauce. "Why didn't you stop her? Say something? Don't you have any decency? Did you help set her up?" And Antonio's reply, calm, direct. Pinned to the top, "I let the food speak. That was all." At Ridgefield Culinary's office, Antonio stood with a black coffee in one hand, phone off, inbox full. Students passed him in the hallway whispering, eyes wide, like they'd spotted a celebrity. Someone had chalked, "Let the food speak," onto the sidewalk outside the admin building. He didn't correct it. He just sipped his coffee and walked. Meanwhile, back at the estate, Lena was in her kitchen. Not the event space, just her own kitchen. Seated at the breakfast nook, peeling apples for a tart. No camera, no crowd. Just the soft scrape of the paring knife, and the bowl beside her filling slowly. Maya stepped in holding a laptop. "It's everywhere," she said. Lena didn't look up. "I figured it might be." "You want me to post a response?" "No," Lena said. "Let her panic alone. Silence is hotter than shame." Maya smiled. She turned the laptop slightly toward Lena. The paused video showed Kristen holding a sauce whisk like it was foreign, standing beneath the mirror lights with mascara smudged under her eyes. Lena glanced at it, then back at her apples. She cut another slice, clean and confident, and dropped it into the bowl. "Turn it off," she said. "We've got real food to make." By the following week, Kristen's inbox looked like a demolition site. 4 festival rejections in 3 days. 1 from Sonoma. 1 from Carmel by the Sea. 1 from a boutique Napa food and wine fair she'd once tagged herself attending, unsolicited. And the worst, an automated reply from the Santa Barbara Women in Food Expo. "Thank you for your interest. We are not accepting applications from unverified culinary contributors at this time." Unverified. She stared at the word as if it had teeth. Elsewhere, someone had done the work she never thought anyone would. A mid-level food blogger from Portland posted a meticulous side-by-side comparison. Kristen's original recipes against their sources. Split screen, highlighting, arrows, fonts circled. Line for line, this is copy-paste culinary theft. Even the garnish cues are unchanged. The article made it to Reddit, then to Twitter, then to a think piece in Bon Appetit titled, "What Happens When the Recipe Card Isn't Yours?" Kristen refreshed her website dashboard. Bounce rate, 89%. Average view time, 14 seconds. She tried pivoting. She updated her Instagram bio to wine, flavor, and legacy. Then deleted every post older than 2 months. Then started again. A picture of a half-full wine glass on a sunlit windowsill. Caption: slowing down, letting the grapes speak now. It got 12 likes. One comment said, "They're saying, please stop." Meanwhile, Gwen was being courted. She sat across from an editor at the Napa Journal, sipping a black Americano, flipping through mock-ups of a new column layout. "We want your voice," the editor said. Something sharp. Something unapologetic. Gwen looked unimpressed. "You sure? I offend people before breakfast. That's what we're counting on. We were thinking, title-wise, respect your elders?" Gwen grinned. Printed in all caps. And Lena? Lena was getting invitations, emails, handwritten notes, phone calls, quiet ones, respectful ones. A leadership retreat in Sedona for women chefs over 50. A keynote spot at a legacy food conference in Asheville. A request to mentor 2 students from Ridgefield who wanted to train in Southern cuisine with integrity. Maya organized it all from the corner desk in the pantry, where the light was good and the Wi-Fi was strong. She made a spreadsheet, color-coded by month. "You're booked through March," she said one morning, "and Gwen wants to know if she can ride shotgun to Sedona." "She'll want to control the music," Lena replied without looking up from the tart crust she was pinching. "She said it's that, or she drives." Lena smirked. "Fine. But if she puts on jazz fusion again, I'm jumping out." Back in the guest house, Kristen tried podcasting. She bought a mic, lit a candle, recorded 3 episodes in a single afternoon, on wine pairings, on flavor storytelling, on how to rebound gracefully from creative sabotage. She uploaded the first one with a heavy-lidded selfie and the caption, "Sometimes the palate needs to mature before it speaks." No one listened. No one shared. She checked the analytics. 2 plays. One was her own. That night, Ethan sat across from her at the table, silent, watching her poke at a salad she hadn't dressed. "You ever think maybe it's time for a break?" he said quietly. Kristen didn't look up. "A break from what?" "From all of it. The branding, the scramble. Maybe we just step back." "You mean I step back?" she snapped. "While your mother gets all the praise and all the press and I become what? Background?" "That's not what I said." "It's exactly what you meant." He said nothing. Kristen stood abruptly, chair scraping the tile. "She humiliated me," she said, trembling now, voice sharp with something colder than anger. "And you just let her." Ethan watched her, unreadable. "She didn't have to make it public." "You did that," he said. And then he left the table, just quietly enough that she couldn't call it abandonment. Ethan found her in the guesthouse kitchen, pacing with her phone in one hand and a half-drunk glass of wine in the other. "I'm telling you, they spliced it to make me look incompetent," Kristen snapped, mid-voicemail. "It was edited. Overexposed. They used the worst angles. I look like a washed-out intern." She ended the call without waiting for a reply and tossed the phone onto the counter like it had insulted her. Then she turned and saw Ethan, standing in the doorway, hands in his pockets, tired written all over him. Her eyes were sharp, glittering. "You know what this is?" "Sabotage. She's been planning it for months. All of it. The guest list, the cameras, even the mirrors. It was a trap." Ethan didn't move. "You laughed at my mother in her own house." Kristen's mouth fell open. "Excuse me?" "You mocked her cooking," he said, his voice low and controlled. "In front of guests, in front of me. And you weren't even quiet about it." She stepped forward, incredulous. "That? That's what this is about? A comment at a dinner party?" "It wasn't just a comment, Kristen. It was a joke." "No. It was cruel." He paused. "And it wasn't just that night." She blinked hard like she couldn't process what she was hearing. "She humiliated me, publicly. She made me look like I don't belong here." "You did that yourself," he said, finally meeting her eyes. You sent the invites. You posted the stories. You booked a chef to help you serve a dish you didn't even write. And when it blew up, you acted like it was theft. She planned it. And you handed her the script, he said, calm but final. You wrote every line. Kristen looked at him, a breath caught in her throat. You're supposed to defend me. I'm supposed to know when you're right, he said. This isn't one of those times. The silence after that wasn't heavy. It was hollow. A space opening between them that had no bridge left. He turned toward the door. She called after him. Where are you going? He stopped. Away. Just for a few days. Where? He didn't answer. The vineyard guest suite hadn't been used in months, not since late harvest, but the sheets were freshly laundered, the pillows fluffed. The mini fridge was stocked. His favorite beer. Herbed goat cheese. Marinated olives. Sliced turkey. A handwritten label on the Tupperware. Roast chicken, Thursday dinner. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, shoes still on, head in his hands. He didn't need a lecture, or a pep talk, or even a hug. He just needed space to stop pretending like neutrality was kindness. Across the main house, Gwen found the pantry chalkboard and left a note in thick, crooked handwriting. Sometimes men need to stew a little, don't stir. Then she pulled the cork from a bottle of Zinfandel and poured herself half a glass. Lena glanced at the message later that night while putting away the cast-iron skillet. She didn't smile, but she did leave the fridge light on. The estate dining room, once a showroom for polished performances and curated illusions, had changed. The mirrors were still overhead, but the lighting was softer now. Less spotlight. More invitation. The long table had returned, not dressed in linen but bare wood, warm and solid. Baskets of produce lined the counters, beets with their green still attached, sweet potatoes dusted in vineyard soil, apples with bruises no one bothered to hide. Lena stood at the head of the room wearing her apron, not pristine, not performative, just used. The kids filtered in slowly. Foster teens, most of them unsure, a few trying hard not to look curious. Maya greeted each one with quiet welcome. Gwen stood near the knives, arms crossed like she was ready to send someone home for slouching, but her eyes were kind. Today we make cornbread, Lena said, tapping the countertop with her wedding band. The real kind. Cast iron, hot oil, cornmeal that's got grit. No sugar. No shortcuts. A boy with a shaved head raised a hand. Why no sugar? Because some things aren't supposed to be sweet, Gwen answered before Lena could. Like truth or consequence. A few kids chuckled. One girl rolled her eyes, but they leaned in. They always leaned in. Later, a photographer from Heritage and Table came through. Quiet, respectful, dressed down. She stayed behind the line tape, only shot in natural light. Don't pose, she told Lena gently. Just teach. Lena did. The magazine ran the feature the following month, a full spread titled Flavors You Can't Fake, the vineyard voice behind the viral silence. They didn't name Kristen. They didn't have to. Across town, Kristen sat in front of her laptop, scrolling through the online edition. The banner image was Lena in profile, head bent over a mixing bowl, a group of kids around her, all focused, all listening. She wasn't even smiling. She didn't need to. The article quoted Antonio. It quoted Maya. It quoted Gwen. It did not quote Kristen. She closed the browser. A week later, Kristen filled out a web form under a pseudonym, Kay Landry, and applied to the next Monroe Estate cooking workshop. She listed her interests as Southern French fusion, wine storytelling, mentorship through food. The rejection email came within the hour. Thank you for your interest in our community programming. At this time, we are prioritizing spaces for youth, families, and culinary students seeking foundational skills and mentorship. We regret that we are unable to accommodate your request. The Lena Table Team. The Lena Table. Kristen stared at the name, jaw tightening. She opened her own desktop folder marked Brand Concepts and clicked on the file she'd mocked up months ago. The Table, by Kristen Meme. The fonts were identical. She barely heard the doorbell. The envelope was thick. Legal weight. Stamped with a Napa law firm she recognized from local disputes and vineyard zoning articles. Inside, a cease and desist order. Infringement. Unauthorized use of brand concept and protected name identity. Client. The Lena Table. Monroe Estate Culinary Division. She read it twice. 3 times. The wording was firm. Clean. Permanent. Kristen tossed it aside like it was nothing, but she didn't touch her laptop again that night. At a press Q&A for Heritage and Table's fall feature, Ethan stood behind the mic, hands loose at his sides. Someone had asked about Lena's rise, about the virality, about the family legacy. He didn't glance at Kristen in the back row. "Pride without roots doesn't feed anyone," he said. "Not in the kitchen. Not in a marriage. Not in a life." No one clapped, but no one interrupted him either. Kristen lowered her eyes. For the first time, she didn't defend herself, not even in her head. The invite went out quietly, no hashtags, no grand posturing. Just an email blast to Napa Valley subscribers with the subject line, "A return to the table, an intimate evening with Kristen Monroe." It was held at a small event space downtown, converted warehouse, open brick, Edison bulbs trying too hard. The flyer promised a 4-course restorative meal. Seasonal, heartfelt, personal. The ticket price was steep, the guest list was short. But Gwen bought hers immediately. Front row. When she checked in, she didn't use a pseudonym. Just Gwen Mercer. No one dared comment. Lena arrived without fanfare, slipping into a seat near the back, her coat still buttoned, her presence like a held breath. She didn't remove her gloves. She didn't unfold her napkin, but she watched everything. Kristen entered 5 minutes late, breathless and overpolished. Foundation set a little too heavy. Eyes rimmed in smoky defiance. She didn't speak to the guests. She just nodded, adjusted her apron, and moved to the prep station. The first course. A roasted beet carpaccio with goat cheese and microgreens. It was plated with care, but the beets were undercooked. Tough at the center, like she hadn't waited long enough. The second course arrived. Mushroom risotto. It looked the part. Creamy, delicately arranged, but the seasoning was timid. Salt barely there. No umami, like she'd been afraid to taste it too often. Afraid to try again. Gwen poked at it once with her fork and said nothing. By the third course, a duck breast over parsnip puree, one guest, a silver-haired food critic known for his 2-sentence takedowns, had quietly folded his napkin and left. He didn't make a scene, didn't wait for the final plate. He didn't have to. Kristen saw him go, saw the way her own hands were shaking now as she seared the last round of duck. The skin blistered unevenly. She pressed it down harder, trying to force it crisp. She burned the edge. Someone coughed in the silence. The final dish, a dessert, arrived late. Poached pears with red wine reduction and whipped mascarpone. The pears were mealy. The reduction was thin. The mascarpone had split. Gwen didn't finish hers. When Kristen returned from the kitchen to say a few closing words, Gwen had already left. No goodbye. No look back. Just a folded napkin beside her plate and a torn sheet from the comment card left behind. Written in bold, slanted handwriting. "Nothing's worse than a dish with no soul." Kristen stared at it. Read it once. Then again. The words hit harder than any online comment had. She looked toward the back of the room, scanning faces, disoriented, until her gaze landed on Lena, still seated, still watching. Their eyes met for the first time in weeks. Lena didn't move, didn't blink. Kristen froze, and for the first time there was no anger in her expression, just silence, and the unbearable weight of what it meant. The first rain of December had just rolled through Napa, leaving the vineyard air damp and earthy, clinging to every branch and vine. Inside the estate kitchen it was warm, heat rising from the ovens, soft jazz humming from a corner speaker, the clatter of knives and spoons filling the gaps between stories and laughter. The long table had been extended end to end through the dining hall, flanked by folding chairs borrowed from the vineyard crew's tasting tent. No florals, no silver. Just white enamel dishes stacked beside mason jars of cider, roasted squash, and cornbread already steaming in cast iron. This wasn't an event. It was a dinner. Lena stood at the head of the prep line, hair tied back, sleeves rolled to her elbows. Her apron bore stains she hadn't bothered to hide. A dish towel was slung over her shoulder like punctuation. Antonio stood at the far station stirring a pot of gumbo, humming under his breath. Gwen chopped pecans with the rhythm of a metronome, her tongue poking slightly from the corner of her mouth. Maya moved between them like current, checking, plating, adjusting seasoning with practiced grace. "Don't forget the vinegar in the greens," Lena called. "I already did," Maya said. "Then add more," Gwen said. "They'll think we're from the north." Laughter rang out. One of the culinary students, new, bright-eyed, nearly sliced their fingertip, distracted by the rhythm of it all. Outside, lanterns strung across the trellis glowed against the damp twilight. The guests were vineyard hands, students from Ridgefield, and a few retirees from the community center. No influencers, no sign-ups, just a dinner for the people who did the work and rarely sat at the table they made possible. The door creaked open mid-prep, and Ethan stepped in. He wasn't announced. He didn't ask where he was needed. He just rolled up his sleeves and joined Maya at the salad station, quietly washing mustard greens without a word. Gwen glanced up. "Look who remembered where the knives live." Antonio handed him a towel. "You hungry?" Ethan nodded. "I'm here to serve first." Lena didn't turn, didn't speak. But she passed him a bowl of buttered peas like it was a peace offering. By 7, the room had filled with noise, plates clinking, forks scraping, laughter rising from corners. No speeches, no cameras, just steam and bread and full plates being passed hand to hand. Each course had come from Lena's handwritten recipe box, dog-eared, flour-dusted, ink smeared by time and fingertips. Each dish had been made by someone who knew it mattered. Antonio had recreated Lena's crab cakes with Creole remoulade. Gwen made her smothered pork chops, thick with onion gravy. Maya brought out a sweet potato pie with a crust so flaky Lena didn't speak for 2 whole bites. Ethan moved between tables with pitchers of sweet tea and cider, refilling cups, listening more than talking. There was no mention of Kristen, not in name, not in gesture. No one asked. No one looked for her. At the end of the meal, Gwen stood and tapped her spoon to her glass, not for attention, but because it was the only way she knew how to mark a moment. She raised her glass. "This," she said, eyes scanning the table, "is what happens when the food has roots. And the people do too." She looked down the line, toward Lena. "A lesson in soul and sauce." The room clinked glasses, murmurs of "here, here," and "that's right," drifting through the air like steam. Lena smiled, quietly, fully. She picked up her fork again, dug into her plate, and didn't rush a single bite. At the far end of the table, one of the students leaned over to another. "I thought she was retired," he whispered. "She is," the other said, "but she never stopped feeding people." Outside, the rain had cleared, The vineyard shimmered under a low, silver fog. And inside, the table stayed full. The first thing Maya noticed was the smell of aged paper and spice. Stacks of Lena's recipe cards covered the long butcher block in the kitchen, yellowed at the corners, some stained with red wine, olive oil, or the unmistakable dusting of paprika. They weren't filed alphabetically. Some weren't filed at all. But each one bore Lena's handwriting, tight, looping, no nonsense. Maya held one up. Cabbage braised in vinegar and onion. Don't skip the bacon grease. A small ink blot trailed under the word onion, like a comma in a sentence that never ended. Lena stood across from her, wiping her hands on a rag that had seen better years. You sure you're ready? Maya asked, voice soft. I'm sure I'm done keeping it all to myself. That spring, Lena formally donated the entirety of her recipe archive, 64 years of cooking, surviving, raising, feeding, to the Ridgefield Culinary Foundation. Not for display, not for prestige, but for scholarship. For hands that would know what to do with recipes that didn't come with glamour, but did come with meaning. Gwen helped draft the endowment letter, red pen in hand, rewriting every line with the fury of someone who'd sharpened their voice as much as their knives. Antonio designed the plaque that would hang above the new wing of the Academy's community kitchen, the Lena table, for food that feeds more than hunger. When the doors opened, there was no press conference, just students, staff, apprentices, and a buffet line of Lena's recipes, prepared by people who respected every single one. Kristen left town the same week. No farewell post, no going away brunch. Her blog went offline with no redirect. Her Instagram changed to private, then disappeared entirely. One day, Maya clicked the bookmark by habit and found a 404 page in its place. Gone, she said aloud, not surprised. Lena didn't ask where Kristen went. Neither did Ethan, and that somehow made the ending stick. Maya moved into the guest house full-time by summer, not as a tenant, but as Lena's apprentice and, eventually, partner. Together, they reorganized the estate dining room into a working lab, tastings on Tuesdays, classes on Thursdays, a rotating supper club every Saturday. Applications were simple. One paragraph explaining what food meant to you, not what you cooked, not how many followers you had, but why you cared. Every seat was always full. One Saturday evening, Lena stood in her kitchen just before service, adjusting the flowchart Maya had drawn up in dry erase marker. She checked the prep list, rechecked the oven temp. She wasn't cooking tonight. That was Maya's turn. But old habits stayed close. Before she stepped out, Lena paused at the far wall of the kitchen, where the smallest frame hung near the window. Inside, Kristen's original sea bass recipe, laminated, the font still smug. But across the top, Lena had taken a thick red pen and drawn a single clean line through the title. Signature sea bass, Kristen Monroe. Below the strikeout, someone had added a note in black ink, adapted from Bon Appetit, 2011. Lena didn't smile when she looked at it, but she didn't frown either. She simply acknowledged it, as one does a scar, not with bitterness, but with clarity. Behind her, the kitchen was alive again. Maya's voice floated from the back pantry, giving final instructions. Ethan laughed with a vendor at the delivery door. Gwen clanged a pan too loudly on purpose just to make someone jump. Outside, the guests were arriving, most of them not influencers or chefs or critics. Just people who had heard there was a table that only asked you to bring respect. Lena took her place near the sideboard. She didn't lead. She didn't oversee. She just watched the food go out, watched people taste, watched them close their eyes at the second bite. And finally, as the last plate was served, she walked to the doorway of the kitchen and leaned there, arms folded, quiet. She didn't need to say it out loud. But in every simmer, in every pour, in every quiet seat taken with intention, it was already there. She mocked my flavor. Now it seasons every table but hers.